Hey, it's Thomas. My pronouns are he and him. I'm grateful you've joined me. This podcast is being recorded in Honolulu, Hawaii. I acknowledge that the unceded Aina, or land on which I live, a community called Kaka'ako, is part of the larger territory recognized by Kanaka Maoli or Indigenous Hawaiians. I'm so honored and grateful to be a guest of the Hawaiian Kingdom. Some scientists think that in life, as in nature, a little messiness signifies flexibility and perhaps even an ability to improvise. And I'll bet, like me, you even have a junk drawer, that blessed messy catch-all for things you don't know what to do with. The messiest times in my life have really inspired the most change. In this podcast, don't edit out the messiness. I'll chat about life's mess. We've all been there, or perhaps you're actually sitting in some degree of mess right now. It may sound a bit strange to hear, but I'm going to advocate for you to embrace the mess, perhaps at times even champion it. I'll share some of my messes and the lessons they've taught me. I'll even walk you through a number of tactics to support you in being with your mess. So welcome, let's dive in. Again, I'm thrilled to have you with me. It is true that messy can be painful. In the middle of a mess, whether a health crisis, some money challenges, perhaps a crumbling relationship, it's hard to see the light, and it's even harder to feel the light. My life some decades ago was a financial mess. My late 20s, my early 30s. I took a devastating loss, and it took so much to recoil from the pain. I had zero teachers on the notion of abundance in my life. So I enrolled in a course, more like a lifestyle. The course was called the Prosperity Project. I found myself with a prosperity coach. I had more debt than money coming in. I had zero assets. Mostly I was afraid of how I was going to climb out of this financial mess I created for myself. And of course, I didn't want to acknowledge it to anybody. Had huge shame around that issue. So sitting in the mess was uncomfortable, but I was going to hide the mess from everybody because I didn't want them to see. That's what I created for myself. My prosperity coach asked me one day, where did I learn my sense of having no abundance from? Who taught me? Or how did I learn to value lack? The question really pissed me off. And I knew there was something there for me to reveal because of the anger I felt. Let me tell you where my value for lack originated from. And this probably goes back to, there's 5 little Dolan kids in the back of a Chevy Impala. In the front seat is my brother-in-law, Gordon. In the middle is my eldest sister, Maureen. Gordon is her husband. And beside Maureen is my mom, Dorothy May. We are going from Calgary's poorer district, being driven by Gordon kind of halfway across the city, to what is Calgary's more affluent district. We're going to see Christmas lights. It's December, the middle of December. I'm excited. My 4 siblings are excited. And of course, Gordon knows the route. And in the middle of this lake, it was called Bonavista, a human-made lake, was this bit of a mountain out of snow that they had made. I had no idea how they did it. Decorated with lights. I remember different cartoon characters as if they were skiing down these slopes. It was really amazing. And I was so in awe of it. So were my 4 siblings. We had a blast. The car was all fogged up. The condensation of 8 folks in a Chevy Impala was a little overwhelming. We had to constantly wipe. It was a minus a million outside, but we could still see it. Actually, the condensation made the twinkling of the lights even more Christmas-like. Here's what I remember most. In the midst of driving down another street, Mom takes a puff of her cigarette. The blue smoke kind of fills and wafts towards her 5 children. And she says this to us. All of these lights that you see are in houses that belong to people who have a lot of money. And guess what, she says? None of them are happy. None of these folks who had these beautiful homes were happy. Here's the story I made up. If I have any money, I won't be happy. So what I was willing to do as a little boy, because I wanted to be loved and liked by my mom, was to embrace the value my mom had for money, which was zero. Mom's entire life was run from the perspective of lack. From that moment forward, I was running a value on lack that wasn't even mine. No wonder I was drawn to a prosperity coach. What's the solution to life feeling messy? When will it end? What's on the other side? On the other side of this financial mess laid my prosperity. But the first thing I had to do was to acknowledge it. When I discovered where it came from, it wasn't about blaming mom. It was about recognizing that I had embraced a value that in my adult life I was running. It was for lack. I didn't even know what prosperity was. And sometimes, until we have clarity, we get caught up in the drama, the pain, and the guilt that comes as a result of the mess. And that was the mess of running life from the perspective of lack. My solutions, with the support of my prosperity coach, was to create my own sense of value around prosperity. It wasn't easy work, not at all. I was encouraged to embrace, to accept, that was a challenge, and to come to enjoy the complete mess that was my life. It's the only way I could begin to climb out of the financial mess I created for myself. From a place of acknowledging what I had done was the only place I could get to a place that was different than that, even though at the time I had no idea what that was. I had to give up the impulse to be in charge and learn when to let go of the realistic ambitions that were causing me to feel this way. I had to stop running my life from a place of lack. I began to consider that the kindest thing I could do for myself was to actually embrace the complexity I had created in my life at that time, to own the messiness, to own the fact that I had no prosperity. So before the ego's quest for perfection took control of me and began to lead my life, who was I? Well, I was pretending to myself, to a small circle of friends, not to have this mess. Ego was running the show. I was afraid. Who was I before I allowed ego to run the show? All the lacking from our existence in the midst of a mess is actually a dose of reality. To be exceptional, you don't have to be flawless. All I needed to be was my authentic self. So loving the flaw of lack actually had created some degree of uniqueness for me. And it became the quest by being able to fully accept every aspect of who I was. That was my big challenge. It's messy to be someone you're not, but your true, unapologetic self is much easier to be. So rarely are opportunities presented to us in a perfect way. They don't come in a nice little box with a yellow bow on top saying, here, open it, it's perfect, you'll love it. Opportunities, the good ones, can be messy, can be confusing, can be hard to recognize. They're risky. They challenge us. That's one reason they cross our path. So out of the mess of lack, I walked into, and see if this makes sense on some level. It does to me. I walked into the mess of prosperity. Because as I began to build up this notion and have a value for prosperity, it was messy. Because it fought against my ego's pull to keep me in lack. Because remember, I didn't know at the time it was a value of my mom. I wanted to be loved and liked by her. So I wasn't willing to let go completely of that value because my thought was egotistically from fear that I would let go of the love that my mom had for me by no longer running that value that was hers in my life. Isn't that wacky? And yet I got myself through that, right? My messiness it made me my authentic self. So your defects and weaknesses actually make you authentic. I began to stop focusing on the shortcoming, the lack, because I began to realize that nobody was looking at that anyways. In actuality, the traits that I was disliking about myself might have been some of the traits that actually drew people to me. this notion of being so unique because of my, at the time, many freckles, perhaps a personality that I'm not going to own this as me. Well, yeah, at times I can be boisterous. So this boisterous personality, kind of a tell it like it is demeanor and total openness, those are things that drew people to me. So I could believe that these perceived weaknesses lessen my awesomeness, but the contrary is true. These characteristics actually kind of set me apart. At the time, I thought probably my competition, but ultimately what they did was they allowed me to be apart from that old way of being, that lack, as I created a new way of being called prosperity. And I think this will resonate for you. The understatement of the century is that we are our own harshest critics, right? But if we put ourselves in your closest friend's shoes, whenever you begin to feel inadequate or like your life is going in a different direction from you want to, if they were present, what would they tell you? If I had said to some folks back then whose values, whose opinions I valued, who I trust, who I felt loved me, wouldn't judge me, what would they have told me if I told them my life was a financial mess? If I could have been truthful with myself, I think I know what they would have told me. They would have told me that I was more than I could probably have realized. They'd convince me that those quirks were endearing. They wouldn't allow me to be so harsh on myself. And of course, in all of that, they'd be accurate too. But instead, I didn't share the mess. Everything in myself at that time that I wished to change is precisely what actually made me the special version of Thomas that I was at that time. Why on earth would I want to pretend to resemble someone else? It's preferable to stand out by being distinctive than to blend in and follow the crowd. You're simply too great for that, even in your messiness. I can see that now. It wasn't something that I could embrace. And until I began to kind of form this podcast, I really didn't get how much I wanted to ignore or pretend that that part of my life existed at one point in time. So this podcast has allowed me to love that former messy part of me and also acknowledge to you that there will be times there I will be just as messy. Absolutely. Messy will be a part of my experience until I draw my last breath. And of course, on the other side of that is this notion, this bullshit notion that perfection, right, as in life isn't messy, will actually return to us. No, that's a lie of the ego, right? Consider this. Where can you go next once you've achieved this notion of perfection? I know I'm preaching to the choir here. Everything that comes after that will be a huge letdown since there's no room for you to develop, grow, and accomplish more than you could ever imagine in that ideal bubble called perfection. The options are zero. Is it really that alluring when you give it some serious thought that you'd want to run away from some degree of mess at some point in time and instead fool yourself into thinking life is going to be perfect? I think I can feel your answer to that question. Making errors and accepting that life is messy provide you with ongoing opportunities to grow and become a better version of yourself. It's when, and it's what gives you a sense of purpose. It molds you and eventually defines who you are. Being flawed entails constantly aiming higher while avoiding being fixated on something that's an illusion, particularly as illusionary as perfection is. I'll take the game show. I'll take Messi for 20 points, Jack. I think the call is to create an environment where you can be who you are authentically without unreasonable expectations, restrictions, or restraints. I'm constantly remembering to glimpse the beauty hidden in all the chaos and messiness that lies ahead. That you like me and me like you, we will make errors. And that life won't always be easy. Can we be okay with that? Can we recognize the beauty that surrounds us if we approach life with the proper, realistic perspective? For the mornings when I don't make my bed, which can drive me bananas, my messy bed is a sign that my husband and I had a wonderful sleep, rested, renewed, ready to go. And ultimately, who gives a shit if the bed isn't made? I've learned to appreciate the mess. And of course, ultimately, depending on your belief, we only have one chance to live a messy life. So here's the call to embracing it. Let me talk about some reasons why I'm going to invite you to embrace life's messiness. Accepting the messiness of life means you actually have control over your happiness. When I was pushing away the messiness, I wasn't happy. When I wasn't accepting what was, 100% of the time I was suffering. By accepting the messiness, you have control over your happiness. It all comes down to taking care of yourself and ensuring that your life is being lived by your expectations. Since it is none of their business, you're under no obligation to let anyone dictate how you should live. Don't let anyone, including your ego, make you feel inadequate. No one should ever make you feel unworthy because you still don't have everything worked out. Can you name somebody in your life? Can you name anybody in your experience that's got it all worked out? And even if you think you can, my invitation is then to go to that person and ask them if they've got it all figured out. I'll bet they'll tell you that they don't. Right? Your life is yours, and you get to set the pace. I was a sprinter in high school and university, right? I ended up running 400-meter sprints, which were brutal. And I also ran a marathon. I prefer life being a marathon, right? I prefer giving life time. Just because things are a little messy right now doesn't mean they're actually going to remain that way forever. And the only person who understands what makes your heart sing is you. And of course, maybe you're having a hard time right now. Perhaps you've deviated from the course you intended to follow. My invitation is to notice how you feel about it. If there's anxiety, breathe into it, acknowledge it. But my invitation is to let go of the stress connected to that deviation right now. Because I've learned that the deviation, right from the car ride with mom and dad decades down the road, when I had an opportunity to figure out what it was about, I needed to be in that car ride to figure out 30 years later that there was a value in my life that wasn't mine and it was running my life. So everyone experiences times of being lost and unsure of what to do with their lives. And in those moments where you've been that person who's been unsure, did your world end? Mine did not. I thought it would. That was my ego. But it didn't end. Let me share with you some strategies to perhaps support you in being with the messiness in life. I think there's about 8 of them. The one, to begin with, number 1, quit repressing your feelings. Oh my gosh, that was me. Yeah, repress. When you face your anxiety head on, you're more prepared to make lasting change. Discussing your sentiments, your messiness with a trusted coach, perhaps a therapist, a devoted confidant, might help you distinguish between thoughts that have substance and those that just land in the field of negative self-talk. Second, this might seem a little bit strange, but make your schedule work for you. I'm a big fan of structure. It can preserve a feeling of order and help you experience less worry when you follow a steady and well-planned regime. It's about creating a simple, effective strategy that works for you. For instance, commit that you will complete one activity today and you will completely focus on it until you complete it. And of course, beyond that, there's no mess. The third one, boy, this was big for me. Let go of shame. Messiness strikes everyone at some point. It's possible that the situation is beyond your control or that you've made some mistakes. Even if it didn't work out, keep in mind that you did the best you could under the circumstances. Every misstep teaches a lesson. However, tools and insights also come with lessons. Since you now have more resources, and not just from listening to this podcast, than you've ever had before, you're actually better equipped than ever to actually put yourself and your life back on track because of that messiness. And with a gentle reminder, right? I remind myself of my flaws, gently remind you of the ones that you hold, my scars, perhaps even my wounds. And then I gently remember they all make up, right? This beautiful mess called my life. They all make up. What you might embrace is this beautiful mess in this moment called your life. Number 4, this really helped me. My passion for learning got me to the prosperity coach, and the passion for that work allowed me to begin to focus on prosperity. So put your passions first. When life is messy, surround yourself with soothing activities you enjoy. Find little methods to follow your passions every day. It helps to cultivate the mentality, the mindset, the heart set you need to get your life back on track, to honor yourself in tiny ways each day, right? These are what I call turtle steps, right? Not big steps, turtle steps. Number 5, take a deep breath. Nothing is more terrifying than watching your world fall apart because of messiness. However, that sensation is simply what you're sensing. When you feel like your life is really messy, keep your attention on the present moment. Your feelings, they're not facts. Can you sit quietly reflecting on what's going on in this moment? Can you be present? Can you remember that you're still breathing? You're not decaying because of that messiness. The world isn't finished with you. Other chances clearly are heading your way. This might sound strange, and when I penned it, it kind of felt a little bit weird to me, but I went with it anyways. This notion of, well, in the messiness, be of service to others. When you feel life is messy, why would you serve another? Being there for someone helps you feel valuable and shows your ability to face challenges head on and actually prevail over them. You become more equipped to deal with your challenging issues, and the person you've supported or assisted will always remember how you made them feel. It's not this notion of get out of your head. That invitation was sent to me all through my lifetime, particularly from adults who didn't want me to breathe into my superpowers of being the sensitive little gay boy I was. I'm not inviting you to get out of your head. What I'm inviting you to do with whatever's going on in your head and your heart is to maybe get into somebody else's and to find out how you could support them. Number 7, recognize or acknowledge the messiness. So yeah, the situation is good right now. Can you go ahead and own it? You may not want to. Your ego may attempt to battle with you because it wants to keep you in that, right? The ego always comes from fear. It may want to keep you in that. Because ultimately, let's acknowledge this. Everyone is trying to conceal some sort of chaos. Just go ahead and look at your social media feed. If you're honest about who you are, it might startle you to learn that you're not alone. You're not the only one sitting in a mess. Reject the shame that comes with it. Be supported by those around you. Encourage somebody. Being able to acknowledge that unexpected events truly provide you really with limitless insight is the first step towards acceptance of the messiness. Every single issue that gave you pause or caused you discomfort, I guarantee also help you to realize a great deal. Did that mess come as a teacher? Yes, it wasn't cloaked in that for me to begin with until the teacher of prosperity actually showed up. But in this particular case, that messiness was a huge teacher for me. The other thing I did, and this would be the last bit of tactic I'll share with you, is this notion of kind of reframing your assumptions. Rather than pondering why is my life a mess, try to provide a solution to the query this way. What parts of my life are actually being held together right now? What in my life is working? So you take the energy off of why is my life so messy? Because that's pointless. You'll maybe not figure that out. If anything, at some point in time, come back and ask, how did I get myself to the point where my life was messy? That will give you some really great answers. But in the midst of it, because it's usually reactionary, why am I in such a friggin' mess right now? Take a breath, kind of stop because your ego wants to go to town on you and shame you. Instead, what am I holding together right now? And see if you can come up with some answers. What in my life is working? Your issue area, that messy area, will start to feel smaller as you pinpoint the aspects of your life that are actually functioning well. And this wouldn't be news to you. When your perception shifts, what happens? When your perception shifts, you're right. Your reality shifts as well. So let's talk about moving forward with less messiness. I mean, is that even possible? I'm going to assert it is. So first of all, we're all messy. Thus, life is messy. There is simply no getting around that. And when you have great expectations, the messiness of humans may lead to all kinds of anguish. And sure, it's fantastic that your friends and family keep their word. You notice they put in a little extra effort. They arrive on time. They communicate well. Hell, they even at times act responsibly. They might even act like grown-ups. However, life inevitably interferes and individuals don't always show up as you'd like them to. So my invitation is giving up attempting to define or be perfect in an imperfect world. Remember, messiness will always come with this notion of, but if my life was perfect, which is impossible, it doesn't exist, my life wouldn't be messy. Allow those folks whom you don't want to be messy to actually be themselves. Be truthful about the consequences when they don't deliver. And yet, because you've been that person who's been messy, you've been that person who hasn't delivered, see if you can find some compassion, some empathy. And most of all, be kind when you're on the receiving end of somebody actually being messy. Because again, back to life is indeed messy, right? You would get bored if there were no challenges to solve. So alter your perspective and approach life with inquiry, compassion, and for me, always a dash of humor. Accepting the complexity of life is ultimately, that's what's liberating. And let me close with a bit of wisdom taught to me in my 6 decades of life. And I'll do it with as much humility as I possibly can. It's this to begin with: messy is a blessing, right? And I might get, if you're sitting in a mess right now, I might get, screw you, Dolan. This mess is not a blessing. And I hear you. And you're right. It doesn't feel that way. Your life is always going to be messy. That's the nature of the story. Your life will often feel incomplete. You'll search for conclusions. You'll worry about getting there instead of being here. You're always going to be bound by change, and things will seldom go to plan. Like me, you'll fret for the future because of your past, and in doing so, lose what you have in the present. Your life is always going to be messy. But pretending to be someone else, you'll attract people you don't like. And you won't attract the people you'd really like to be around. People will sometimes misunderstand you and misrepresent you. People will form their own opinion and idea of you, no matter how clearly you present yourself. It's best to learn who you really are and just be yourself and be with people who love you for who you are, not for the impression that you might have created. It's best not to compromise yourself to fit in, and best not to spend time with people you feel you have to impress. I've learned it's always best to be yourself. You will have successes. You will have failures. You'll have wealth. You'll have poverty. One problem solved might create two new problems to be solved, and the people you love might leave you. I sound a tad like Dr. Seuss right now, don't I? But however the story of your life plays out, you will still have this moment right now. And in this moment, right now, things are okay. Just in this moment. You're listening to my words, and there is no goal. There's no image of perfection. There's no comparison. You got no should going on or no should not going on. And everything you're sitting with right now is entirely appropriate as you listen to my voice. It can feel like a relief to understand and acknowledge that your life won't follow a plan, that life is messy, that some things won't work out. It can feel like a relief to understand and acknowledge that we can't control how people behave or how events in our life will unfold. It can feel like a relief to understand and acknowledge that it's our thoughts that feed our emotions, our way of thinking about other people's behaviors or the events in our life. That's what drives and determines our emotions, not the events themselves. It can feel like a relief to understand and acknowledge that you can take a moment away from your thoughts. And in doing so, in taking a moment, we're helping ourselves to control and to take control over how we respond to those thoughts. Because in this moment, Eckhart Tolle would say, in this now, there is perfection, because this now is exactly how it needs to be, just as it is. Your whole life might feel like an imperfect mess. But how can that be when you have this perfect moment, this perfect, peaceful moment in a life that's filled with moments? Thank you for sharing time with me. I appreciate you. It's always helpful to have you rate, review, and share my podcast with family and friends, along with subscribing to Conversations with Thomas, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm a huge proponent of taking charge of my mental health, and that means seeking advice from professional therapists, counselors, psychologists, physicians, and other qualified professionals. These conversations, these podcasts that I create are not meant to help you find a place that is away from the advice you've been given by a professional. These conversations are meant to help you find a place of inquiry. But if you're experiencing ongoing mental health challenges, I implore you to seek support from a licensed professional. I've not intended that anything I share in this podcast is a replacement for their advice. Most of what I share as subject matter on this podcast is usually sourced from extraordinary insights from family, dear friends, things I bump into on my daily walk along life's path. And I cover it or imbue it or lift it with a healthy dose of research. Conversations with Thomas is executive produced by me, Thomas Kevin Dolan. It is also co-executive produced by my purveyor of all things techie, my amazing husband, Adam Ma. And I'd love to hear from you. Please email me at conversationswt@gmail.com. Conversations, the W is with, the T is Thomas. Conversationswiththomas@gmail.com. I'd love to read your feedback on my episodes, hear your suggestions for future conversations with Thomas. And if you're comfortable sharing the impact of these episodes, I'd be honored. I really would be honored to hold that information and that opinion with reverence. I really would. Thank you.